1. To begin, I've always had this feeling that someone was watching me ever since I moved into my family house 8 years ago. At first, I thought I just watched too much ID investigation, and I was just being paranoid. But I could not help looking over my shoulder when I would walk to school or to my bus stop. When I would walk to school, I was always scared in the mornings when it would be dark during the winter or fall, because where I live is just vast country lands. I live in Canada, and although not much crime happens in my neighborhood, I never could rid myself of this eerie feeling. Even when I would come back home from school, being home alone did not help. I would triple-check my windows and locks to make sure everything was locked. However, in my basement, our garage door would never fully lock, since the door hinge was broken and detached from the door. Therefore, it would never properly close. I always told my dad to fix this door, but because he would always go away for work, he never found the time to do so. Stupidly, I thought nothing bad would happen since my garage needed a 4-digit passcode to get in. On a side note, I just want to let everyone know that never under any circumstances put your birthday as your passcode to anything, even if you switch up the dates so that the day is first and then the month is second. Do not do it, because it will be obvious. Now, my theory is that he knew the passcode to my house, therefore he had free reign for 7 years to go through my things. At first I thought I was being forgetful. Maybe I was the one who misplaced my underwear somewhere. Maybe I was the one who misplaced my favorite top, or maybe my dad accidentally donated it. But I should have known better. During my 4 years in high school, he never really contacted me. It was when I went to university that things started to change. Since I lived in the countryside, I decided to go to university an hour away. My dad did not want me to live on residence because he didn't want to leave the house unattended for long periods of time. So we came to the conclusion that it would be best if I drive to and from school. Now, I would leave university very early in the morning, around 6 a.m., and come back around 6 p.m. at night. I stopped being aware of my surroundings at this time because I would be tired from my 12-hour days, and now that I wasn't walking alone, everything would be fine. When I would come home from university, I would find certain things moved in my house. Now, I'm a neat freak, and I might have mild OCD, so I like things a particular way in my house. When little things like my makeup or candles would be moved, I thought it was odd and would frequently bring it up with my dad, but he would just say that it must have been me who was doing it. But it wasn't me. During my 2nd and 3rd year in university, I started getting weird notes in my mailbox. The writing on these notes looked almost childlike, and it would always be written in blue ink. I have those country-style mailboxes at the end of my driveway, where the little red flag goes up whenever we get mail. From my way back from university, I would always check the mail, and sometimes I would find these letters. The letters would never be long. In fact, they would only be 1 to 3 sentences that would contain odd questions like, "Where are you? I wonder what you do while you're away from home. How do you find university? It must be tiring driving that long. Did you make new friends? Do you still hang out with your best friend? You dress differently now, why is that? I miss the scarves you used to wear. You don't close your curtains as much anymore. Why don't you look for me?" These letters would always come once a month at the beginning of the month. I would show my dad, and at first he would say, "Oh, maybe your cousins are just pranking you," or "Could be it's probably your friends." But every time I would ask my friends or cousins, they would give me this confused response, saying that they never sent me any letters. Now that I am in my 4th year at university, the letters do not come as frequently. But 2 weeks ago, something happened that makes me think things are escalating. I came back home from university at 7:45 p.m., and it was fairly dark outside. I saw that my mailbox flag was up, so I checked the mail, and it was just bills. At this point, I have gotten a note for a little over 3 months now, so I am thinking maybe the notes will not come anymore. As I settle in for bed, I change into my pajamas, and I check the locks as usual. As I checked my front door lock, I looked at the glass panel of my door and I saw the red flag of the mailbox is up. It's 10:30 at night. No way the mail could have gotten dropped off, and plus I just checked the mail. I called my dad and tell him about it, and he said not to freak out, and that maybe one of our neighbors accidentally got our mail and just dropped it off since this happens frequently. I stay on the phone with my dad as I quickly run down my driveway to check my mailbox. As I open the mailbox, I feel my heart drop, because it's an unmarked manila envelope. I quickly run back inside and open the manila envelope, and although there is no written note, I find something more disturbing. It is a pair of my old blue panties that I haven't seen in years. At this point I scream, and my dad tells me to hang up and call my aunt, who is a police officer. My aunt comes over and checks the inside and outside of my house, but she can't find anything. She tries to jog my memory and asks if I know anyone who could be doing this, but I honestly have no idea. My aunt told me to keep any more letters I get, and she has been staying with me the days my dad is out for work. My dad is thinking about installing security cameras, and hopefully we can catch whoever it is that way. But what else can I do? I am so paranoid and scared. I do not know who this person is, but I know he has been stalking me for a while. Those panties he sent me were ones I had while I was in high school, and I lost that pair when I was in grade 10. The fear of the unknown is getting to me so much that my anxiety is not letting me function properly. I just don't know what to do. 2. So this happened when I was in college. I would often use the computer labs on campus because at that time I didn't have my own computer, and a lot of my assignments involved some sort of electronic component. And then I would hang out there or other areas of campus, because I didn't really have many friends other than the few I had made there. So I would hang out with them and such. Sometimes I would just be there kind of late. I also tutored, so it wasn't uncommon for me to be there after dark. During college, I kind of came out of my shell a bit more, and was more inclined to talk to people I didn't know. One day in the computer lab, I was working on my latest story I have been writing since I was 11, which happened to be a horror story. This one kid, whose name I never did get, sat down next to me even though the lab only had a few other people in it. I didn't think too much of it, especially when this guy started talking to me. He was actually being kind of flirty, which, you know, is usually flattering, so I figured he just thought I was cute or something. He wasn't really my type. For one thing, I hadn't realized I liked guys yet, and for another, he was kind of emo. That was when emoism was big. I wasn't really into that anyway. But you don't have to be attracted to someone to talk to them, so I was nice and chatted with him a bit, even though I really wanted to write. Eventually this guy asked me what I was working on, and I told him. He thought it was super cool and said he was a writer too, and that piqued my interest because I didn't know a lot of writers at the time. So I asked him what he wrote, and he said it was predominantly horror as well. He told me that he was writing a story with his friends in it, and that it was a slasher like Scream. Well, those are interesting to me, and I didn't think much of his friends being in it until he said, "I really just wanted to write a story where my friends are, like, brutally murdered or whatever." That was verbatim. I remember it very clearly. Well, that was super weird, and he got even weirder when he asked if I wanted to read it. I kind of waffled a bit about it, not wanting to be rude, and then made an excuse to leave when he got kind of intense about it. Later that night I was home, and got a friend request from someone I didn't know. This was during the MySpace era, and this guy's URL and name on the site was BloodChow666. I knew right away who it was before I even went to his profile. I was surprised that it wasn't weirder, so I wanted to be polite and accepted his request. That was a mistake. He began sending me parts of his story, and dear God, it was even worse than it sounded when he told me about it. Not only were his friends getting killed, he was writing them in extremely sexual scenarios, and the death scenes were very, very violent. I wanted to stop reading, but my friend Ashley, who'd been in the room when I met this guy, wanted to keep reading it, so I did with her. We were basically WTFing the entire time because holy shit, It was weird and morbid and dark, and made me extremely uncomfortable. I deleted him eventually from MySpace and then blocked him, not wanting to talk to him again. While this guy wouldn't let it go, he'd find me alone on campus wanting to know why I deleted my MySpace, which is what I told him. And I worried about what he'd do if he found out the truth. He became very insistent that I keep reading his story, and he kept following me around trying to give me pages. I debated telling someone, but I was young and naive and thought maybe he was just lonely. However, he was really starting to scare me, especially when he'd find me alone in the parking lot at night. More than once I had to quickly get in my car and lock the door right away. He didn't exactly chase me, but he might as well have. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it ended. I never saw or heard from him again, and I think maybe he dropped out. At the time I was dealing with a different stalker situation, so I didn't question it. I was just grateful. So Blood Chow 666, let's not meet. 3. So a few years ago, when I was still living in South Africa, my friend had saved up a bunch of passes to the Kruger Park he had been given through his work, and decided to treat me and 2 other friends to a road trip. A close friend of my uncle owned a property on a small game reserve really close to Kruger, so I asked if we could stay there for 5 days, and we got the all clear, so we were pretty hyped. A week-long trip to the bush, and all the money that we would have had to spend on accommodation and entrance fees was instead getting spent on petrol, food, and, most of all, booze. I'd stayed at Trevor's place a few times before growing up. Accommodation in the Kruger Park itself was always really expensive, so most of my trips there we stayed at his place. Sometimes with him there, sometimes without. He was a really laid-back guy with loads of money, and was really cool all around. It was a really nice property too, much nicer than most of the places you get to stay in at the Kruger Park. We settled in and made ourselves at home pretty quickly after arriving. It was like a little piece of luxury for us. We each got our own room, and I only had to share a bathroom with 1 other girl. There was a pool and fire pit in the back garden, which is where we spent most of our evenings, barbecuing and drinking sundowners after the day's activities of watching wild animals from my friend's Toyota. Our spirits were really lifted because we had been quite lucky the past few days with how much we got to see during our drives, and we were hoping our luck would last to the end of the trip. Sometimes you can go to Kruger and just see a whole bunch of impala and like a warthog in the far distance, and other times it's like Noah's Ark outside your window. On the second last night, things took a bit of a dive. It started when the power went out around 9 p.m. Not unusual in South Africa by any means, and especially not in the rural areas. We predicted it would probably be the whole night without electricity, which was a bit annoying but didn't kill the night by any means. The 4 of us found a few candles and placed them in the main living room, and proceeded to play a bunch of drinking games by candlelight. Now I'm going to have to give a quick description on the layout of the house, so that this next part makes sense. We were in the living room, which was a large open area that had couches and a TV on one side, and a bar complete with a dartboard and pool table on the other. There was a sliding glass door leading out to the back garden where the pool and fire pit was. Attached to the lounge was a long corridor, along which all 5 bedrooms were located, most of which were en suite, so there was I think about 7 doors in total if my memory serves me correctly. Basically just a long-ass corridor that leads to the kitchen and dining area, which was the same size as the room we were in, and also had a sliding glass door, except this one led to the front of the property where my friend's car was parked. So it's around 1 a.m. now, and everyone is pretty hammered. I was supposed to be driving us around the next day, so I was sticking to beers when everyone else had already switched to the hard stuff. I was still pretty drunk, but was by far the most sober. All of a sudden we heard a crashing sound in the kitchen. We all froze and looked behind ourselves, no doubt all double-checking that it wasn't one of us that had gone for a snack. One of the guys looks over at me wide-eyed and mouthed, "Baboon." Shit, I thought. One of us must not have closed the door all the way. We knew, or I suppose thought, that it was really safe out there where we were, but you did have to make sure you kept everything shut up tight, because baboons will 100% take an open window as an invitation to steal all your food. I did not particularly feel like facing a baboon, or possibly multiple baboons. as they are normally in troops. They're scary big up close, and I was sure that scaring it or cornering it in the kitchen could very well end up with me getting my face chewed off. So I started to brainstorm on how we could chase it away before it or they decided to start wandering around the house for more food and eventually find us. I remembered how Trevor had rubber snakes strewn around the property at various locations outside, specifically to scare off baboons, and this is what I formed my plan around. Being the most sober, I bravely anointed myself as head of the mission and sent 2 of my friends to search around the room for any rubber snakes that might have been stored or hidden around. I then grabbed our box of matches we had used to light the candles, and then slowly crept towards the dark corridor, my heart hammering in my throat. I could hear movement in the kitchen, and I remember praying that it hadn't broken something that belonged to Trevor, because I really didn't want to let him know we were dumb enough to leave a door open. About halfway down, I started to rattle the box, hoping to high heaven that it resembled the sound of a snake hiss or rattle, even though I wasn't even 100% sure we have rattlesnakes there. I took a few more slow steps toward the kitchen, not being able to see into it as it lay too far to the left of the hallway. I kept shaking the box without missing a beat. I was close enough now that if one of my friends had found a toy snake, I'd be able to volley around a corner and into the kitchen, hopefully scaring the bejesus out of the baboon. I had the drunkest of my friends simply standing watch by the bar window that had a view out onto the driveway, so he could let me know if it finally ran off. I couldn't hear movement in the kitchen anymore, but my friend hadn't given me the all clear, so I thought maybe it had heard me and was trying to figure out what the sound was. Doubling down on my snake impression, I started to hiss along with the shaking of the box of matches. I was hissing for maybe 3 or so seconds when I heard the sliding door open. It took me a moment to realize what was wrong with that. When my friend shout whispered from the bar, "Holy shit, dude, that's not a fucking baboon. That was a fucking person, what the fuck?" My adrenaline was already pumping, but hearing that made it shoot through the roof. I bolted around the corner, shut and locked the sliding door before booking it back to the lounge, where the rest of my friends were all standing equally as wide-eyed and shaky as I was. The 3 of us that hadn't seen the guy rounded on the friend who had, and started bombarding him with questions. Are you sure? Maybe it was just a particularly big baboon. But he was dead set on what he saw. And then I remembered that I had heard the sliding door, and upon announcing that to everyone, we all fell silent to contemplate that fact. Baboons don't open sliding doors, they just don't. We figured that we must have actually closed it. We just didn't lock it because in our minds we were just keeping out animals, not burglars. We were obviously all incredibly freaked out that someone had been in here. And the more we expressed that, the more we started to realize just how weird it was that someone was out here of all places. The property was on a private game reserve. The only way tourists got in was by booking drives in those big safari trucks. You weren't allowed to just drive around on your own unless you were staying on the property here. There were maybe 10 or so properties in total, and there were kilometers between them, as well as long-ass dirt roads to get to any specific one from the main road. It's just not the type of place that makes sense to rob, especially on foot. My friend said he saw the guy run into the bushes. Not even down the driveway. It just didn't make any sense, and honestly, it still doesn't. I wish I had a better resolution for you guys. We told park security first thing the next morning, and they took us super seriously, which we were grateful for. And we were given the private number of the head guard to contact after hours, if we saw or heard anything on our last night, which we thankfully did not. I phoned Trevor too, obviously to tell him what had happened, and he was horrified but still teased me about pretending to be a snake, in order to scare off what we thought was a baboon, saying that it sounded like a pretty great way to get a baboon to run up to you and steal your matches. Haven't heard anything about it since, so I assume no one has ever tried to break in again. I guess we were just super unlucky that night. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 338. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I'd just like to say thank you very much to everybody who joined me for the live stream over the weekend. I'm assuming you joined me for the live stream. I'm recording this very late on, or very early on Friday morning, actually. Let's hope there were no cock-ups in this one, and I didn't have to delete it like I did the last one. Accidental face reveal. Yes, if you had been, those of you who were keen-eyed might have seen it, but I don't think anybody actually noticed. So, yeah, I'll have to be more careful in future. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.